Hello, my name is Patrick Tracey, and welcome to Veterans Corner. This is a program sponsored by the Town of Westborough's Veterans Advisory Board and hosted by Westborough Television. The goal of Veterans Corner is to provide important information on topical issues to educate Westborough and Massachusetts residents on issues affecting veterans, their families, and friends regarding issues that may impact them as well as the overall community. Additionally, Veterans Corner is a medium that provides an opportunity to spotlight veterans in our community and highlight their military service as well as their civic contributions. Today, Veterans Corner is fortunate to have Mr. Denzil Drewry, Denny, as a guest. We would like to highlight Denny's military service and community involvement that have had a significant impact on the town and its residents. As a way of background, Denny is a U.S. Army veteran that served in the U.S. Army in the late 1960s. Notably, Denny has been selected as the Veteran of the Year by the Westborough Veterans Advisory Board and the Board of Selectmen. He received this award from the Board of Selectmen in May of 2019. Denny was selected as a Veteran of the Year due to his veteran status resulting from his service in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War, as well as his contributions and participation in governing the town of Westborough as a previous member of the Board of Selectmen. During his time in military service, Denny was assigned as an officer in the Special Forces, namely the Green Berets. He was deployed to Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. After his military service, Denny and his wife eventually relocated to Westborough, where he has been a resident since the late 1970s. Denny and his wife Lorraine, who goes by Rainey, whom he has been married to for 49 years, raised a family in Westborough that includes 2 children, Scott and Jamie, as well as 2 grandchildren. Denny became active in the town of Westborough, serving 6 terms on the Board of Selectmen over almost 20 years. Denny has also served on various town committees. He has also been involved in a number of civic organizations over the years, donating his time and efforts to organizations such as the Rotary Club and the American Legion. As a result of Denny's involvement in the town of Westborough and surrounding areas, he has made a significant and positive impact on the residents of Westborough, and we are privileged to have him as a guest today. Denny, thank you for appearing on today's show, and welcome.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. You have a great committee.
Denny, as way of background, why don't we touch on your family history, if we can?
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about where you grew up and what your mother and father did for a living?
I sure can. I was born in 1945 in Eastport, Maine, most easterly city in the United States. And because I was there, as my dad was in the Navy in World War II, and he was stationed there. And he met my mom, who was born and raised in Eastport, and they got married, and then he shipped off to Okinawa, which was a battle that isn't that well known today, but there was a lot of casualties and KIAs on Okinawa. And then he came back, and I lived in Eastport for a few years. My dad learned the shoe business, hand-sewn loafers and things like that. And my grandparents were on a railroad. My grandmother worked in a sardine factory, cutting the heads off of sardines. So I grew up in a very privileged environment, as you can tell. I did, not financially, but in terms of the parents and grandparents I had, they really taught me what life was all about and try to be a good person as you go through life. So that was very important. We moved to Arnold, Maine, when I was like the 4th, 5th grade. I graduated from Arnold High School, where the university is. And then my dad moved down here, and I moved down to Massachusetts in 1964.
Now, after high school, you attended college, correct?
I did. I started at the University of Maine in engineering.
Okay.
And then when my dad, when the shoe factory in Bangor, Maine was shut down, which a lot of them did at that time, we didn't have the funds to pay for college, so I moved down here. And then I went to the University of Arkansas for a year. which my dad was from there, and the tuition was a lot less. And I did a year of ROTC at the University of Arkansas. And at the end of that year, my roommate and I, whose dad was in World War II, we decided we would join the military. So we actually dropped out of school and joined in the Army. He went in the Army, retired after 30 years as a full colonel, and I went in, I got out as a first lieutenant and stayed a few years in reserves, became a major.
Now, did your dad's service in the military have an influence on you upon joining the Army?
Oh, there's no question about that. Remember, he was one of 7 boys, and the 4 boys, my mother's family. I counted one time, I could now, but I'm guessing somewhere around 7 served in World War II. My oldest uncle was almost died on a Normandy invasion. He was shot in the leg, which was not a life-threatening thing, but he laid on the in the water in the ocean for like over an hour and almost died from pneumonia.
It sounds like you come from a long line of military veterans.
Absolutely.
So after college, you enlisted, is that right?
Yes.
And where did you enlist, and where did you go to basic training?
Well, I enlisted in Washington, D.C. because my roommate's dad worked in the Pentagon. So I went down there and enlisted in Washington, D.C., got on the bus one night at like 11:30 at night, and they drove us to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I did basic training.
So after Fort Bragg and basic training, what happened next in your career?
After basic training at Fort Bragg, again, he and I both volunteered to go to Vietnam, and I volunteered for infantry officer candidate school, and he did for artillery. So after basic training, I went to Fort Ord, California, to advanced infantry training. There is where I was interviewed for officer candidate school, and I was fortunate enough to be selected, and went back to Fort Benning, Georgia, where the infantry officer candidate school was.
And when did you receive your commission?
I received it in 1967, September. I can't remember the exact date. I'd written it down on my notes at home. It was 6 months, and we didn't get a day off for the first 8 weeks. And, and it was infantry OCS, and infantry OCS, about halfway through, they interviewed you and asked you what did you want to do once you got your commission as an infantryman. And I said I wanted to be an airborne paratrooper, and I wanted to be a Green Beret. And when they read the 2 days before we graduated, they read where we were going, I was flabbergasted when they said, Candidate Drewry, you'll be going to the JFK Training Center at Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
And that was for the Green Berets.
And I trained a year there
Okay.
before I went to Vietnam.
Now, what was your influence, or what drove you to want to join the Green Berets?
I was in basic training, again at Fort Bragg, and I heard it, and I didn't know much about it, because the song came out later by Barry Sadler, the Green Beret song. And 12 of these guys got up on stage, and each one of them spoke a different language, and I have a format here that hopefully we can do a quick review. But I saw that. To be quite candid, I just wanted to go into what I felt was the best. Whether it was something that I'd approved to myself, which I think that was part of it, actually.
Okay.
And
so during that year of training for the Green Berets, can you talk a little bit about the type of training you received?
Yes. We did a lot of night jumps. I went also to Fort Holabird, Maryland for 10 weeks to do Special Forces intelligence training. Because when I was an intelligence officer, when I got into Vietnam, but under the Special Forces Green Beret umbrella, not the MI regular one.
Right.
And we did night jumps. We did jumps into rivers, lakes, swamps. The training was very difficult, but I served with a lot of great people. And
so after training for your Green Beret and graduating from Green Beret school, did you have to volunteer for Vietnam, or were you selected to be deployed there?
every time I went to a different training, I always volunteered for Vietnam. And then I called the Pentagon after 11 months after I won the Green Beret, which was an honor. And I knew I was going to go to Vietnam after 1 year as a first lieutenant. I was second lieutenant first year. We were first year to Vietnam, and I called the Pentagon. Some of the people were surprised, and I talked to the person that assigns the infantry officers, and I said, I want to go to Vietnam, and I want to be on the Special Forces A team. And that's what I did.
So how long after volunteering for service in Vietnam did you deploy to Southeast Asia?
Well, it was just a matter of a couple of months. Once I'd done my training at Fort Bragg, which was about 9 to 10 months, and then the next 2 months was just doing some action as far as parachuting out different weapons. We were, because where we were in Vietnam at times, I mean, we might have AK-47s, Chinese machine guns, because that's what the North Vietnamese had. So we did a training for almost a month of firing different weapons from all over the world.
Now, when you deployed to Vietnam, approximately what year was that?
Well, that was like 1968, September of 1968. I think it was September the 27th.
So that was really at the height of the war during that time.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And when you deployed to Vietnam, can you please talk about what your roles and responsibilities there were as part of an A-team? And, you know, once you talk about that, we'll kind of get into the structure of an A-team.
Okay. Well, when I first got there, and they saw that I'd gone to Special Forces Intelligence School, they put me in the S3, which is the intelligence department, at the headquarters in Da Nang. So for a couple of months, I went out to all of the A camps and went on missions with their intel sergeants. And so I got a good view of the whole area, the mountain areas, the rice paddies and all of that. And then I wanted to be on an A team because that was the unit in Special Forces at the time.
Can you talk a little bit about what was the objective or objectives for the A teams in Vietnam or the surrounding areas?
Well, that's a good question because a lot of people that aren't aware of it is what we really were, we were teachers. There were 12 of us, sometimes 10, sometimes a little bit more depending on the situation. We would go out and recruit the locals. Well, I had to be an I Corps, so we had some Mountain Yards people and we had regular Vietnamese out near the border. And over time, we had over 500 of the indigenous people from that area. And we clothed them, we fed them, we trained them, and we took them on missions. Some missions it was myself, one other Special Forces team member, and 4 or 5 Vietnamese or Mountain Yards on a recon mission. And the time when I got wounded, we went out with over 100 of them because the NVA had a regiment that was almost going to overrun our camp, so we went out on that. And so we trained them, and the interesting thing is that they're local people. It'd be like recruiting in Westborough and Northborough and Grafton. Right. So whenever our camp, on a couple occasions, came close to be overrun, we actually allowed them to bring their families and their grandparents and their dogs into our camp, which was be like Schaefer Stadium, not the field, but the whole thing. Right. With barbed wire and tripwires and all of that. We would actually bring them in to protect them because the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong were, they were vicious. You know, we had, except for a few exceptions, we had a high level of morale, and we would not kill innocent people or even soldiers that we captured. But they would come in because they didn't like the fact that we were training the Vietnamese people who lived in that area.
So you mentioned a little bit that A teams were comprised of 12 service members.
Yes.
Can you briefly describe what that composition looked like?
Yes. It's a 12-man detachment A. Now there's detachment B, which is a large group, and a C team, which is usually the headquarters. And what you have is you have a captain, commander, a first lieutenant, executive officer. We have an operational sergeant, an intelligence sergeant, 2 weapons sergeant, 1 large weapons, 1 junior weapons. We have 2 senior engineers because we were involved in construction and all that. We have 2 medics, a senior medic and a junior medic, and junior commo and a senior commo. Now our medics, I might add, they train, once they become a Green Beret, they train for a whole year at Fort Sam Houston. Okay. They actually worked in hospitals, did could have penicillin. And what they would do is I always took them with me on the mission. And but part of the reason was we came into a village. The medic was really the kingpin, because in one village, the village chief's daughter was sick, really sick, and he had penicillin and he treated her, and she lived. And of course, from that time on,
It certainly builds morale.
builds morale, and we started getting information. Unfortunately, a few months later, they were overrun by the North Vietnamese, and most of them were killed.
Now, the 8 teams were comprised of 12 service members, and it
Correct.
sounds like there was 2 or more in each specialty area.
Correct.
Why were they designed to have so much redundancy?
That's a good question, because within the team, you want to have, say, Team A and Team B. Team A could stay inside the camp. Team B could go out. Now, normally the teams didn't go out all 6 of them. Typically 2 or 3 of us. But and you wanted it because, remember, we were out in the boondocks. There was no roads out there, and if your medic, one of your medics is killed, quite frankly, mine almost did. He and I were medevaced on the same day. Then you've got another medic to back you up. So that's why there's no other unit of 12 that has 2 officers.
Right.
A captain and a first lieutenant. That's pretty rare.
Right. So when these patrols would go out, what was the objective or the purpose of these patrols?
Well, it was a small group of 5 or 6 of us, and really just reconnaissance. If we heard something from the headquarters that they thought there were some of the enemy forces located at such and such a hill, but we didn't want to make contact, we would go out anywhere from 4 to 5 or 6 of us. When we knew that they were almost overran our outpost, which they did, in over 46 to 50 of our soldiers were killed. No Americans, fortunately, but the Vietnamese were overrun, and they were about 1,000 meters from us. I took my medic and myself and about 100 others, so we went out with a little over 100, because a company size unit, because we knew that they had a regiment, and we were going to be up against something.
Now, these 8 teams were strategically placed throughout Vietnam and other countries, is that right?
Yes, in Vietnam, we basically were along the borders. There were like over 108 teams. The only way you could get to us is by helicopter. There were no roads or anything. Now, in the world, the Special Forces, they go by a group. Like the 5th Special Forces group was Vietnam. The 10th Special Forces were Germany. This is my time. Now, today, the 5th Special Forces group is in Afghanistan. And real quickly, I don't know if you haven't seen the movie 12 Strong, it's been out for a few months. It's a movie about the first people that went into Afghanistan was a Special Forces A team, 12 of them. And they went in secretly and parachuted at night, and they were there, and they did a great job. As a matter of fact, if you've seen a picture of a house with a soldier on it down by Ground Zero in New York City, I don't know if you've ever seen that statue.
Yes, I have.
That's the house, and that's the Green Beret captain that he used to mold it. Because when they got into Afghanistan, and none of them are trained, you didn't have tanks or jeeps or things. They served on horses. So that, and a lot of people don't know, that statue in New York City, the horse of the man, that's the Green Beret that were the first ones in Afghanistan to work with the Afghanistan people.
That's really interesting. I think that provides a good segue. Now, obviously, the Green Berets are part of the Special Forces, like we've talked about. Can you give us a little bit of a background and history on how the Green Berets came to be formed?
Yes. When I saw President Kennedy when he was first elected, when I was at the University of Maine, he came up and landed on a football field, and I was like, wow. And JFK was a hero, a warrior in World War II, as we all know, or most people should know. I respect him as president, but I respect him, and don't take it the wrong way, I respect him more for what he did in World War II. Very brave man.
Fair enough.
And saved a lot of lives. Well, anyway, he went to Fort Bragg, as most presidents will go, and the commander of Fort Bragg says, well, we have these guys called Special Forces, and we want to do a demonstration. So he went down to listen to them, and they had on a Green Beret, and of course the general said, yeah, take them off, because that's not an authorized thing. At the end, General Yarborough, a one-star general, came up to President Kennedy and said, this is special, this Green Beret. Why don't you make it a permanent form? And President Kennedy is revered in Special Forces. That's why they call it the JFK Training Center and everything.
Okay.
Now,
And where is that located?
that's at Fort Bragg.
Okay.
The other interesting thing is when President Kennedy was shot, Jackie requested that the honor guard be Green Berets. And the Green Berets took him down and buried him in Arlington, where his two brothers are there. You can see the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers up. When they left the casket, a Green Beret sergeant took his Green Beret off and put it on JFK's casket. And if you go to the JF's library in Boston, that Green Beret is in a glass case there. So JFK is the hero of Special Forces.
Certainly a connection.
And he earned the right, it was nice of Jackie to think of us at that time. So
Now, what was the purpose when the Green Berets were formed? What was their overall objective as a Special Forces unit?
basically two objectives. One would be small groups doing reconnaissance training and all of that, very similar to what the SEALs do. I went to jump school with SEALs and Marine recon people, because we call each other's name and joke around.
Right.
So some of the missions are direct missions, small group, like I say, the Afghanistan type thing, and others is larger groups. So the mission can be 2 parachuting behind enemy lines. It can be like the A-Team in Afghanistan, training the local indigenous people and going out with several hundred of their soldiers and missions and so forth.
Now,
And there are places where we don't even know sometimes.
well, they're all protecting us, that's for sure. Now, going back to Vietnam, is there a way for you to describe what a typical day during your service in Vietnam was like?
Well, a typical day was waking up at the camp, going around and talking to the people there at night to see if there was any infiltration or anything. I was in with a common where the medics were, and the typical day, 90% of your days, there was no combat. It's not like the movies where it's every day.
Right.
It's not every day and all that. So we would go around, we'd get a Jeep, go down to the village, see the village chief, take him food and things like that. What we did on a typical day was to help the people in the area out.
Okay.
We'd be like the United Nations, so to speak, or the Red Cross, and our medics would go down to see who was sick in the town and all that, and that was very rewarding.
Changing gears a little bit as you moved on through your military career, is there any influences or some life lessons that you learned from your military service that you applied to your professional career after the military?
Yes. I think what I learned by the end of basic training in advance, these young men, except for a few that were kicked out, were standing tall. And most of them stayed in the military, and they were excellent soldiers and excellent people. So the thing I learned in the military was not how to use an AK-47. I learned that don't judge somebody, because whatever the background is, whatever their environment is, if you give them an opportunity to perform and you support them, they will stand tall. They will. Not everyone, but most.
Okay.
So I know a lot of people say, well, I was in a firefight, but to me, that was a great learning experience for me. But by the end of the 2 months, we were all joking, playing cards, and yelling at each other and kidding with each other, and that's what I learned.
So after your return from Vietnam, when did you get discharged from the service?
I was medevaced the end of March, like March 28th, to Japan, and I had surgery.
And that was due to injuries you sustained on the battlefield, correct?
2 things. I got shrapnel in the knee, and I stayed that night, and the next day when I woke up, my knee was that big around I couldn't even stand up, and I was medevaced up. The day before that, my medic we went on a mission. He had shrapnel in his body. We didn't think he would live. He lived. The medics were the smartest people on our team, by the way. I think I told you that.
Yeah.
Because my medic, and I know I'm digressing a little, but my medic just retired 2 years ago from the University of Maine, PhD in microbiology.
Excellent.
So Special Forces, it's just not being a John Wayne type to get in the Special Forces. There's other characteristics that they look for. I kind of deviated a little bit.
So after your discharge from the service, you eventually moved to Westborough, where you became engaged in local politics. So You served 6 terms. That's a long time.
Off and on, 18 years, yeah.
On the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit what led you to get engaged in local politics?
You know, I suspect it was my dad. Like I said, my dad was not a high school graduate. But every Sunday afternoon, Jimmy Willard and I would go over, he would come to my house, and my dad would read to us. National Review with William F. Buckley, and then he would read another one, and it was politics even back then.
Right.
And some of the people in the family were on local committees and everything. And when it came to that, Westborough, you can blame Don Hall to some degree. Still in town, he's a great guy. He got me on the town personnel board.
Okay.
That's how I got started. And then I started going more to town meetings, and I'd see things and so forth. And
So you've
it
been
was just
involved,
a natural thing. Yeah.
You've been involved in the town of Westborough, obviously, for a number of years. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences observing and watching the town change and grow over the years?
Yes. People know I'm not politically correct, so I'll tell you my opinion, is that when I came here, it was a working community mostly. Working at Bay States and Braves and things like that. A lot, probably over half were born and raised in Westborough and stayed here. And they were good people, fine people. They are good today, don't misunderstand me. But back then, life was simpler. You could actually go to a town meeting, and if there's a budget for one of the departments, particularly the schools, if someone thought it was too much, if they got to move thing, they'd make a motion. And sometimes what they wanted, they didn't get. They got mostly what they want. What happened is as educated people moved into town, having higher paid jobs, having the big 4-bedroom colonials with air conditioning, 2-car garages, and all that. And I'll be candid with you, you know, if taxes went up $1,500, $2,000 a year, it doesn't mean much to them. And I'm not being negative, I'm just saying, you asked me a question, I'm going to give you an answer. But the regular people in town, and a lot of them have left, they've had to leave, because $2,000 a year on them, on a retiree, can't do it. So the town changed, and I've been for a long time thinking that we need a city council where you can, and have them represent different areas of town, like a state rep does. They don't do the whole thing.
Okay.
And each little area would have more influence than having a 5-member board of selectmen.
Now, you were also...
That's me. People that know me know that's, I just tell you, you ask me a question, I'm going to answer it.
Understood. Now, you were also involved in the very early stages of the local American Legion post. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it wasn't, it was already there. The VFW was there in the American Legion, but the American Legion was a smaller group. And I ran into a guy named Pete Fay. He postmaster down here. Pete got 2 Purple Hearts in World War II. And he said, why don't you come down to the Parknell House, you know, and to our meetings. I went over there, and it was a house, and they had a little kitchenette. They made eggs and things like that and everything. And I liked most of them were World War II guys. I think I was the only Vietnam guy. And they promoted the American Legion baseball team in town that doesn't exist anymore. They were World War II Korean people and just good people. I just liked them.
Excellent. Great. Well, Denny, thank you very much for coming in today. Importantly, thank you for your service to our country, as well as your involvement and contributions to the community as a whole. We are pleased and privileged to have had you as a guest today and sharing your story with Veterans Corner. Congratulations again for your selection as Westborough's Veteran of the Year, which is a well-deserved honor. I'm Patrick Tracey, and on behalf of the town of Westborough's Veterans Advisory Board, thank you for watching Westborough Veterans Corner.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
I said a lot of things.